Good day, good afternoon, good morning, depending where you are. I'm very happy to welcome political analyst Garland Nixon, who is also a very popular radio show host in Washington. And I'm very glad that you are here, Garland, because we have a very, very fascinating change situation in the world where, the transatlantic alliance is not looking in the same direction anymore, which I think is a very good thing. Uh, or with other words, that the phone call which happened between President Trump and Putin, and then subsequently the meeting which took place in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia between Foreign Minister, Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Sergei the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov, and they had also some other people in the delegation, has led to a situation where, President Trump is clearly looking for an end to the Ukraine war in the short term, and the Europeans are completely freaked out. Now, I personally think this is a long-awaited meeting. It was urgently timed. This war should not have happened in the first place, and it took much too long because the settlement was possible already, in March 22, which was then sabotaged by Boris Johnson. So I think this is a really very, very important development, and I would be extremely interested how it looks from your perspective, given the fact that you are a very acute insider into American politics and international politics. So what do you think?
Well, I think there are a number of angles you could take to look at this. One of the at what's going on now. One of the things that I find interesting is the reaction of the European, particularly the Western European powers. I think, and in particular, the UK. And I'll tell you why. It is my belief that after World War II, and as the British Empire began to recede, and some may argue collapse, that it attached itself to the U.S. empire. And from my perspective, there was a song, a popular song, and the song went like this: "I've got the brains, you've got the brawn, let's make some money," right? And that the Brits, basically the UK, saw themselves as, the United States is kind of strong and they got some brawn. We know how to do empire really well. Since we don't physically have the empire anymore, we'll attach ourselves to the US empire and to some extent guide them to the imperial things that need to be done around the world and effectively still be an empire. What we're seeing now, I think, is a very important time where the British Empire is going to be forced to come to grips with the reality that it's no longer an empire. It's no longer an imperial power. The Brits, they have the accoutrements of an empire, right? They have someone that they can put a robe on, they can put on a crown with stolen jewels from Africa, and they can have the changing of the guard at Buckingham Palace, all of the things that look like an empire. But as the U.S. separates from them, as the U.S. sees them as a problematic, as is not a valuable asset anymore, the U.S. The UK now has to face the reality for the first time in many, many centuries that it's not an empire. They don't rule the waves. The sun sets on the UK. I think, let me add this too. I think this is important. From the perspective of your organization, the Schiller Institute and your organization, I think one of the things that has happened over the past is the imperial power had to ostracize, attack, isolate your organization because you were one of the few organizations that were wise to exactly who they were. And you were talking about this is who the British Empire is and this is what they do. And as the British Empire starts to come to grips with exactly the reality they're dealing with now, I think the necessity for going after your organization will recede, and I think your organization will be able to flourish and do some of the really good work that you're doing more in the open and not be as pushed into the shadows as you have been.
Well, that's very good news. I hope you are right. as a matter of fact, it is quite amazing, that the all the trouble we had really in our almost half a century political, or longer than half a century political work, did come from the Anglosphere. It came from Washington, naturally. I mean, if I would give you a list of people over the decades who have told us that they liked our ideas tremendously, that they were totally enthusiastic and thought that this was a fresh new way of approaching things. And then they got contacted by, embassy officials, by representatives of consulates. And they were told, that if you don't cut it out to work with these people, you will have loss of business, your name will be ruined. And, I think this is really together naturally with the worst of all, which was the prosecution of my late husband. Uh, and, I hope you are right, because I think, as I told in a famous tribunal we had in 95, together with a lot of Black elected officials and Ramsey Clark, among others, that the real crime of all of that was not only what they did to us, and naturally it was not so pleasant, but that they prevented, especially the American people, from having access to ideas, which would have, all this trouble, the 20 years of interventionist wars, the millions of people who died as a result of it in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, all of these things. And, the present situation in the world, which is still a very tortured place, all of that would not have happened if people would have had an unhindered access to the ideas of my late husband, Lyndon LaRouche, and the organization which he has created. So I can only hope, that you are right.
Yes. Well, to be frank, we were told I didn't know anything about the LaRouche organization. All I was told of from what I've learned was, well, they're just a bunch of crazy people. They're crazy people. I didn't, but I was never told why or what they were saying that was so outlandish. And now when I started learning about Chatham House and the Club of Rome and some of these different organizations, and I thought, well, these things are all real and the things that they're talking about. No wonder they're being ostracized. But the bottom line is, I think what we're getting at now is there is a new paradigm. Now, one can argue that it's a different kind of imperial paradigm, maybe a more corporate imperial paradigm out of the US, but a different paradigm nonetheless. And I think the traditional colonial imperial powers in Europe, the Frances and the Germanys, are being pushed into the background. And I think it's that there will, in fact, be, we can celebrate. I think there are things to celebrate right now. There is the chance of a nuclear war, while it's not gone for the moment, seems to, between the major nuclear powers, seems to have been lessened, at least. So there are things that we can, survival is important, but there will be challenges. But it's possible that there may be opportunities, maybe to enlighten people, to have international discussions that weren't available before. But it's going to be a difficult time in Europe, because I think Europe is going to be facing severe economic challenges. The only thing I think that there is maybe an opportunity for Europe is this. Europe did not have independence or sovereignty. It was, to some extent, you could argue there was a vassalage to the US empire or the British Empire, whoever, but clearly the individual countries in Europe, in my opinion, did not have the sovereignty they needed to make decisions on their own. And if some of that starts to happen, I believe there will be opportunities. One of the things that the President Putin said and President Trump have both said is, well, we'll be willing to make individual deals with individual countries in Europe, as opposed to the EU or, these supranational organizations. Well, I think there's opportunities there. If some of the individual countries can begin to come to their senses and say, okay, we'll make some economic deals that work. And, the Russians have nuclear power, or maybe they can come in and build us a plant or whatever, different things that can happen. I think there are opportunities there if new leadership comes to the forefront, and maybe the poverty and the terrible things that are predicted in Europe can be mitigated if the people are allowed to take control. And as you say, if the people are allowed to be exposed to various ideas, I think there's some opportunity here. So there's always room to be positive and hope and push for a better future and a better present.
Well, when Vice President J.D. Vance made this speech in Munich, I really thought this was a breath of fresh air, because, he said, and the audience was gasping. You could actually see how they were trying to get air. He was saying that not Russia and China are the biggest threat to Europe, but it comes from within the European Union itself, namely that there is a suppression of ideas and freedom of expression. And I think that is so true, because, you have almost a dictatorship in terms of what is allowed to say, what is not allowed to say. And I think this hit really in a chord. And I accidentally, the next day, was at a demonstration in Munich by Zoom together with Scott Ritter and Ray McGovern. And, all the people in the they were demonstrating against the Munich Security Conference, because, you see, that conference used to be a very good forum of experts who would discuss security matters when Ewald von Kleist and Horst Telschik were still the heads of it. But ever since Wolfgang Ischinger became its head, it went downhill to the present leadership of Christoph Heusgen, who started to cry, by the way, when he left. He was a real crybaby. But, it turned into a public relation event for the military-industrial complex. So there was a demonstration against it, talking for, to resolve all conflicts through dialogue and negotiations. And I was addressing this by Zoom very briefly, but I was told from our own organizers who participated in the demonstration that the people were absolutely, they loved the speech of Vance, and they said, this is so important that this is being said at one point. So far, so good. I think this was very, very good. The only problem is that, I mean, I'm very happy about what is happening with Ukraine, with Putin, with Trump. I think they made a historic game changer, which I think is extremely valuable. The only thing which is left is what will be the Trump policy in the Middle East, because there, we have the ultimatum of last Saturday, which Trump had made, that the Palestinians should accept, to leave, all of them, the Gaza. And, naturally, that is completely unacceptable. This was rejected by all neighbors. And the, demand that Hamas should deliver all hostages at once, that ultimatum passed, and there was some progress. So it seems that little bit back and forth, this is moving forward. But, the atrocities in the West Bank are continuing. The attacks in Gaza even are continuing. And I'm concerned that, that since Trump had not, his Mideast policy was very much influenced by Zionist elements who are backing either Netanyahu. Netanyahu comes increasingly under attack from Israel itself, from the military there, and others. But nevertheless, there is still a legislation, I think, in the Congress, which forbids students to even show empathy for the plight of the Palestinians. And, there I see a double standard, because I think that if Trump really wants to come in and tell the Europeans, what they should hear, I think a weak spot is if he is then pursuing the same suppression of discussing what is going on in the Middle East in the United States. So what is your take on that?
Couple of things, and something that I've been saying for a while now. I've been trying to navigate the new Trump. This version of Trump is a very different version of Trump than we experienced the first 4 years, and I think partially because there are, I call them the board of directors. The very very powerful tech bros, I call them, that are backing Trump and are clearly have decided to take the country in a different direction. But one of the things that I have really come to the conclusion is that we have to ignore what Trump says. That Trump says things for effect, right? That he makes bombastic, outlandish comments. Well, if the Russians don't do that, we'll double down on them and we'll send extra. And everybody went, really got upset when Trump said, well, if the Russians don't make a deal, we'll double down on them. We'll send more. We'll triple down on the sanctions and all that. And at the time, I thought to myself, yeah, we'll see about that. Trump's just saying that. We'll see what he says. And when we see in actuality what the policies are, they're 180 degrees, or as some people would say, 360 degrees. They're 180 degrees from that. Okay. I've come to the conclusion that Trump is a person who says things with a powerful effect. If you don't do this, I will, something really, really big. And then we all dance around like a cat on a hot tin roof and we all talk about it. And while we're talking about it, they're formulating a policy. So I'm no longer going to connect Trump's bombastic tweets on Truth Social or whatever with his actual policy. I think we're at a point now where we have to see what the Trump administration does and use the actions that happen day to day to try to project the next action, as opposed to use the latest Truth Social bombastic tweet or whatever it is. That being said, here's my point. I don't think it's incidental that the meetings with the Russians were in
Yeah.
Saudi Arabia in the Middle East, that the Saudi leader was considered a mediator, was an integral part of it. The Saudis have said, we know one thing we know for sure about Trump, and that is that he definitely wants normalization with Saudi Arabia. I think the Saudis want it with Israel. The Saudis have made it clear there has to be a Palestinian state in order for that to happen. There are very strong rumors in a number of different areas that have come out basically saying that the part of the discussion with the Russian team was how the U.S. can work with the Russians and use Russians' diplomatic strength to mitigate some of the issues that the U.S. has, be it with Iran and North Korea, et cetera. I believe that what we're seeing here will be a push to resolve the Ukraine issue, and at the same time or shortly after, try to resolve the issue in the Middle East. I believe Trump really wants to resolve that. And I'm not saying it's because he's a good guy or a bad guy, not from a moral perspective, or from the perspective of as a what the vision that he sees for the United States future. I think the discussion that Trump has had recently of reducing the military budget implies you're going to have to clean up your mess in the Middle East if you're going to have less of a military, and you're going to recede. So I think that I believe there will be a push to, the other thing is, it's clear from the rhetoric of the Trump diplomatic team that they want to return to the world community of diplomacy as opposed to trying to dominate the world community of diplomacy. And the only way they can do that, that they can have the moral footing to do that, is to clean up, for lack of a better term, the issue in Gaza, occupied Palestine, however you want it. So I believe that they are looking to take the opportunity to speak with the Russians, to try to work with the Russians and Saudis, and to try to, for lack of a better way to put it, bring the elements in Israel that are out of control to heal and to get a deal. I hope so. It's sad, and again, we must push back against the violence that's going on right now. But I'm trying to guess, and I see that as a possible potential direction that will be coming out of the negotiations in Saudi Arabia. And I'm saying I think there's a lot that will be coming out of the Saudi Arabia um, negotiations other than just Ukraine. There's a lot more going on there other than just Ukraine. And I think it's absolutely it was in Saudi Arabia so they can try to get this Israeli issue dealt with as soon as possible.
Now, as you know, we are pushing the Oasis Plan. This is the idea to develop lots of new fresh water, both from a canal system from the Mediterranean to the Dead Sea, but also, nuclear power for desalination and so forth. I mean, my late husband and I, we were in 2001 in Abu Dhabi, and if you go there along the beach, it is unbelievable. With the help of water, they turned desert into wonderful gardens, into lush plantations, and there is an island which used to be completely empty, and now there's already old vegetation. I mean, it's now 40 years old that they found the oil, and there are birds, birds who are on their tour from for the winter time. They land on this island, and you think it's a paradise. So that approach could be taken for the entire Middle East, because the entire Middle East is desert. I don't know if you ever flew over that region. I once did, and I looked out of the airplane window and I tried to see an oasis, and there was nothing green. So if we could convince maybe the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, they all are very wealthy, and right now, rather than building a ski resort in the desert, which I think is what Saudi Arabia is doing, they could spend some of this money to make the entire region livable for everybody as a basis of peace. Because I believe that the new name for peace is development, and you have to give an incentive to young people that they basically say, okay, let's stop the cycle of violence. Let's become an engineer, a scientist, a parent, because we want to build a future. And I think what is mostly required right now is visionary leaders, be it Trump, be it, people from the region, who basically step forward and say, yeah, let's go for a completely different policy. So my hope is, that since we from the Schiller Institute, we make a huge international campaign about that. And last week we had the International Peace Coalition meeting, where we had the honor to have Dr. Pandor from South Africa, and she endorsed the Oasis Plan. And we have other diplomats from Palestine, from other countries. So I would really hope that this gets to the attention of President Trump, because he's an investor. He could inspire people to invest in such projects, and then it would fly. So what do you think? Is there a chance that he may do that?
I think, yes, I think that should be brought to his attention. It should be pushed. I think it's a great opportunity. And the one of the angles that could be used with President Trump is this. I'm sure you're familiar with California. A significant portion of California is just desert, built on desert, and they have to pump water in, and they have to, and they're having trouble with not getting enough rain. It rains in California for 5 or 6 years, and then it doesn't rain for 5 or 6 years. Desalination plants could be something that could be utilized there So I think from the angle of President Trump, you could push desalination and those types of technologies there, and push the angle that, look, it's something that you can use in the United States, because he's very much into the make America great again and America first and what's good for America. As you develop the technology, also American companies, of course, could be involved, and they could be involved in making money, and it could be used in different parts of the United States. So I think that it's something that could be pushed to, not pushed, but, supported by President Trump. I think there has to be an angle in there for President Trump to see a way that this type of technology and this kind of thing can be done in the United States to help Americans. And if he sees that, it may help him to see that, you look, I want peace and prosperity in that region, but hey, this can help us too. And oh, maybe we can get some, if you know what I'm getting at, I've always said, I used to do sales, and I once had a professor years ago who said, sales is about influencing people to buy something if you're selling a product or a service. And I had a professor years ago that said to me, how do you influence people? He said, everyone's listening to the same radio station, WIIFM. What's in it for me? And if you want to convince anyone of anything, don't tell them it'd be good if you do this. It'd be nice. It'd help people. They'll fall asleep. You have to say to people, this is what's in it for you. And I think by approaching President Trump from the angle of what's in it for not just him, but what's in it for the country that he represents, I think that it's a great idea here, that it will be good for the world. And I think that from that angle, I think there is a great opportunity possibly to get President Trump behind it. And if he gets behind it, I think you could make it happen. And add this, you've got China, who does a lot of building and construction in Africa and the Middle East, who has tremendous capabilities in that region, and who also gets a lot of oil from that region. And so it benefits China to have stability, to have growth in the region, economic growth and expansion. So I think there's a lot of angle to influence world powers, China, Russia, the United States, to get on board, to invest, and to be a part of that. I think it's a great idea.
Well, President Trump did mention a couple of weeks ago, when the fires in Los Angeles were raging, that, why don't you bring the water down from Canada and so forth. And there is the famous NAWAPA, North American Water Management Project, which we were promoting already some decades ago. That could be immediately put on the agenda, and you could really eliminate the danger of such fires not breaking out, but having such a tremendous impact. I mean, if the United States would just look at China and not say this is a threat, which, Vance in Munich said China and Russia are not a threat, and I was very interested to hear that. I mean, if President Trump and the Trump team would just look at what China did, actually they applied the American system of economy, because, this is national banking, it's national control over, sovereign control over the credit. This is what Alexander Hamilton promoted. And if you go back to the American system of economy inside the United States, which were very much under the British system in the recent period, you could do exactly what China did and better. China built 45,000 kilometers, that's about 37,000 miles of fast train. And these trains, they go, it's just a absolute joy to go with them, because you're flying through the landscape. They're not shaking, they're smooth, and 350 kilometers, and they're now building one 400 kilometers. They're already testing one of 600 kilometers, and even a loop of 1,000 kilometers. So, the United States could just go to the most advanced, leapfrog all of these technologies and go to the most advanced, build a totally modern system, build some science cities. The United States is populated at the coast, but it's completely underpopulated in the central areas. And, if one would say, let's connect all the major cities of the United States through high-speed trains, and then build some new cities along these hubs, these not points in this train system. You could make a new science city which would be devoted to the most advanced science and technology. You could have students there. You could have a cultural center. I mean, if the Arabs can build the biggest new museums and whatnot, why can the United States not take the best of all cultures and make it, like a museum kind of demonstration so that all the children and the students who grow up get versed in universal history and really join a completely different outlook. Because I think as much as this idea of make America great again may appeal to the people who are now, they were called by Hillary Clinton the deplorables, which was the most cynical expression you could have. But, the United States is also famous as a melting pot. There are many Asians, many people from Latin America, many people from all places in the world. And, the United States could become a place where a new renaissance is taking place, capitalizing out of the best what all traditions of all cultures have produced so far. And that way, President Trump could become a true visionary. I mean, I know I'm stretching it a little bit, but, I think, one has to put out ideas now which are completely breaking through the old schemes of geopolitics. And I mean, the very idea that some people think that you absolutely have to have an enemy to do what you want to do is in my view, the worst idea that led to 2 world wars. And in the time of thermonuclear weapons, we should absolutely, I think we should regard geopolitics as a mental disease, because I think that that's what it is.
Well, I think that even in your the title for this particular show, the emergence of the new paradigm, and I think that implies that we do have to think, do forward thinking, that we do have to come up with new ideas, and we do have to have some hope and belief that we may be able to institute some of the. No, I say new ideas. As you know, a lot of these ideas aren't new, but they weren't. No one would listen to them, and a big part of the discussion now about the military-industrial complex potentially being cut in half. Whether that's realistic or not, I don't know. But that being said, if we're up around, they say $850 billion. But as you know, by the time you add the Black Ops CIA budgets, by the time you add the USAIDs and the natural endowments, we're over $1 trillion. So now, if you have $500 billion to start with, you can now talk about high-speed rail, which can move people, which can move products and things that need to be moved, whether it's minerals, things like that that are being mined and moved and used. So the reality is that if in fact there's a significant decrease in the military budget, the discussion about high-speed rail, the discussion about building new infrastructure becomes a legitimate discussion. The main reason that these things haven't been a legitimate discussion is because this has been a militaristic empire, and it's all used to build weapons and ship weapons, and all of the money has gone to the military-industrial complex. And might I add this, and this is critical, the issue of brain drain. The issue of, look, when people come out of school with engineering degrees and physics degrees, et cetera, what do? Where are they going to go to make money? They're going to go to Lockheed Martin. They're going to go to Northrop Grumman. They're going to go somewhere where they can use that knowledge to make the latest missile and build the latest targeting system. Right? The technological sector, well, that's used for targeting, and that's used for, we've got to upgrade our nuclear weapons, et cetera. When you change the paradigm to one where we're upgrading our infrastructure, where we're figuring how I can put in high-speed rail, et cetera, now we don't have that brain drain. And when the people come out of college with these STEM degrees now, those intellectual capital, I hate to use those kind of terms that the neoliberals use, but if you understand what I'm saying, the intellectual power of our young people can now be used to target things for the betterment of our society, for the improvement of our society. And it changes again. It's the emergence of a new paradigm, a paradigm where we actually see what was termed as the peace dividend that we never happened, and that peace dividend was redirected to rather than a peace dividend, to double down on a war paradigm. So I think the idea is that that you're talking about are powerful. I think one of the reasons that these ideas were rejected, ideas from your organizations and other organizations, one of the reasons that they were belittled and rejected was because they would have taken some of the financial capital that the warmongers wanted to use for the military industrial complex, for the, let me add this, for the narrative complex of think tanks and fake news operations around the world. Well, once those things aren't draining all the capital that could be used for the advancement and the betterment of our society, now I don't think it will be as critical to shut the mouths of people such as yourself who are coming up with novel ideas. And as I said, some of these ideas aren't even new. They're good ideas, but they simply had to be rejected because they were a threat to the money that was going into the pockets of the warmongers.
Actually, there is one question which came in from Alberto Portugues, who is the founder and president of a peace organization called HUFUD. He says, how can we end the scourge of war in a system where governments of industrial countries have the obligation to promote sales, exports, and what their war industry produces? Now, you answered that in part, and I also answered it in part, but still, the question remains, I mean, a lot of these people contributed to President Trump's election campaign, especially from the Silicon Valley, and the whole area of artificial intelligence and cyber and things like that will play increasingly a bigger role. It will take a tremendous job to direct those. I mean, I'm not against artificial intelligence. I think digitalization, all of these things, like every technology, depends on, is it used for the common good or is it used for evil purposes? And that depends entirely on the quality of the human being which is deploying these technologies. So how do we make the jump, to turn a system which up to the 20th of January was directed in one direction, and with the entry of President Trump, there is a new beginning, but it's a gigantic job. One problem is that the European leadership, or not all of them, but parts of it, is tied to what you call the deep state inside the United States. So, that dynamic is, I mean, the British do not give up. The NATO is still planning to prepare for the coming war with Russia. The Danish military intelligence put out a statement that they expect a big war to come with Russia in 5 years or so. Pistorius of Germany is talking about making the whole country war ready, which is an abomination. Who in Germany would want to have another war? I mean, I find this so absolutely disgusting. First of all, the German history should have taught everybody in Germany a lesson that war is the last thing in the universe you would wish to want. And these warmongers are at it relentlessly. So I have just described some of the difficulties, what is necessary in terms of dealing with these problems for the Trump administration to make the hopeful ray of light, which we saw now with the Riyadh meeting, to become a powerful, steady tendency.
Well, a couple of things. I do believe that the paradigm that is of aggression and confrontation from members of the ruling elite who are in Europe right now will be changed. And I don't think it's, who was it? I remember someone saying some people are born great, some people become great, and some people have greatness forced upon them, right? Well, I think the paradigm will be forced upon the people in Europe who are spoiling for a confrontation with Russia. It will be forced upon them both by the voters of Europe and by the U.S., which will be retreating from Europe, and they will have neither the economic or the political capital that they need to pursue their evil works that would bring us all to a nuclear confrontation. I think that's a good thing. I think an important part of responding to the question that the gentleman, a great question that the gentleman had, was his first three words: how do we? That's a good question. How do we do that, right? And here's how we do that, in my opinion. Number one, you have to continue to build on and strengthen the anti-war community, right? You have to continue to build on those of us who, oppose confrontation. But I think there's a second part of that that we really need to consider now, and that is, when you're just, for instance, I'm here. When the Biden administration was there, and or as I've called them oftentimes, the Blinken-Sullivan administration, we had to push back against people who were clearly, moving in a wrong direction. With Donald Trump, we're going to get a mixed bag, right? We're going to get some things that we're unhappy with. We're going to get some things that we're happy with. I think we have to build the anti-war community, but I think the anti-war community also has to take on a more assertive, it has to have an assertive aspect of it, where we know, rather than just the word anti, I'm opposed to, great, you're opposed to war and military conflict, but what are you for? And now that I can look at the Trump administration and say, well, I'm unhappy with some things that they're doing, but I'm very happy with some things that they're doing. The anti-war community has to have an element of it that when we see our government or any particular official doing policies that we approve of, that we have an element where we, for lack of a better way to put it, we reward them. So when Donald Trump says, I'm going to make peace with country X, that rather than just be the people that run around with signs that say we oppose war with country Y, and then when he says, I'm going to make peace with country X, we go home and look out the window. We now take on an element where when we see a government, a country, a politician doing something that seems to be in the best interest of the people, that we come out in support of that. That's not saying we support Donald Trump or we don't support Donald Trump. That the perspective is, when there are policies that we oppose, that we actively oppose them in a unified manner. But when we see things that we do like, that we come out and we pat him on the back and say, President Trump, that's a great job getting peace with Russia. What happens, something we don't do. We had this huge, I was one of the speakers. A lot of our viewers might have saw this, but we had this very large rally in DC a couple years ago called the Rage Against the War Machine. Well, what's wrong if we get a deal with the Russians, and now everything, and we have the signed, and it goes through our Senate, and now we have a treaty with the Russians, of having a rally that's not a rage against the war machine, of having a rally that says, we are happy about this and we support this thing that's happened, that we say to the Trump administration, can you have someone from your administration come to speak at our rally, and we want to support this particular thing. Now, if they do something else we don't like, we push back against that. But I think there needs to be an element, because there are opportunities now. I think there needs to be an element of the anti-war community that is also there to push for the things that we like and to reward the politicians and the administrations that move in a direction that's a more peaceful direction.
Well, I think that is good advice, because, I think the world has also dramatically changed since 4 years ago, because, you have now the anti-colonial formation of the BRICS. You have the global South, which is the global majority. I don't think that is a genie which can be pushed back into the bottle, because the Africans, the Latin Americans, many Asian countries, they reviving the spirit of Bandung. This year is the 70th anniversary of that historic conference. But the difference is that, in 55, when the Asian and African countries got together for the first time in earnest to create the non-aligned movement, they lacked the strength. And therefore, all the efforts to try to get a new world economic order were pushed back. And, we were involved in that. My husband wrote an International Development Bank proposal already in 1975, which was adopted by the non-aligned movement in 76 in Colombo. But then all the leaders who had signed that, Indira Gandhi, Mrs. Bandaranaike from Sri Lanka, Ali Bhutto, all of them got destabilized. In the case of Bhutto, even killed. So the whole movement did not really make big advances. But now with the rise of China, China has lifted 850 million people out of poverty, which I think is the greatest civilizational contribution, because poverty is a human rights violation. If people have to be not sure that they have a meal for the next day, how can you talk about human rights? So China has contributed, and I'm not claiming that I'm a China expert, but I have traveled to China since 71, so that puts me in a very rare category of people who have observed the rise of China with my own eyes many, many times. And in the deepest of my conviction, I do not believe that China is an imperial aggressive power. They believe they are not exporting their ideology and ask other countries to take it as their own. They think that the non-interference into the other system is what is the basis for a just win-win cooperation, where everybody has advantages and everybody thinks that the advantage of the other goes into their own advantage. So therefore, I think that the biggest hurdle, in my view, is that, given the fact that the countries of Africa really think that China is their friend, dismissing Churchill's crazy idea that countries don't have friends and only interest. I have talked to many Africans who told me that they really think that the attitude of China towards Africa has proven that they act as a friend. And the same goes for Russia, because Russia has supported the independence movement, and now it's supplying them with energy and so forth. But the biggest hurdle is, can the new Trump administration take a positive relationship to this desire of the global South to overcome colonialism forever and become middle-level income countries themselves? I think that is probably the biggest hurdle to be taken, and I would like to hear what you think.
I agree with you, and in the context of that particular issue, I think you have to, which we have yet to see, you have to see what the Trump administration's attitude will be to South America, and in particular to Cuba, to Nicaragua, and to Venezuela, particularly Venezuela, because that's where the oil is, and that's going to be a major focus. And I don't, we don't yet know what it's going to be, because one of the discussions that's been here, and I'm sure you heard it, is a discussion of spheres of influence, wherein maybe the new people in power, the new direction of the U.S. would be, we've got spheres of influence. China has theirs, Russia has theirs, and we have ours. We take over Greenland or Canada, and now this hemisphere is our sphere of influence. Of course, people that have presented that to me and said, what do you think about that? Do you think that's the plan? I said, well, for one thing, Russia and China would never buy into it, because rather than spheres of influence, what you're looking at is blocks. And instead of military blocks or ideological blocks with the Soviet bloc and the American bloc, you're just looking at geographical blocks, and blocks ultimately end in contradictions. They end in confrontations, and blocks end in war. So I think the Russia or China perspective would be, look, if we want to do business with countries in South America, fine. If you want to do businesses with countries in the, in the Caucasus or in Asia, that's fine. Everybody does business with who they want to. So I think we have yet to see the direction that the U.S. is choosing to go regarding that, but I think it is critical now. We're starting to see the direction towards Europe and towards Eurasia to some extent unfold regarding the U.S. foreign policy. I do think it's important to keep an eye on the direction they choose, particularly in South America, Caribbean, in their local area, whether they pursue one of diplomacy, such as with the world powers, or one of the traditional one of domination. So let's face it, as everyone knows, some decades, there are decades when nothing happens and weeks where decades happen. While we've only been had the Trump administration in office for literally 3 or 4 weeks. It seems like it's been 3 or 4 years and changes. So I would admonish people not to jump the gun and make a lot of assumptions of what they're going to do, either good or bad, so that we can remain fluid. Those of us in the anti war, in the pro-growth, in the pro-humanity community can be fluid, can keep an eye on the direction that things are going, because right now things are fluid. I think the mistake that a lot of people are making is going overboard and trying to predict, because all of the predictions that we're hearing now are based on the old paradigms. Well, Trump did that in his first, so he's going to do that. Well, the Russians have always did that, so they're going to do that. Well, the U.S. administration is imperial power. They've already done that. It's a mistake now. And exactly as you're saying, we're in the emergence of a new paradigm. The new paradigm hasn't even completely taken shape. And from a positive perspective, because the new paradigm is forming now, it gives people like us an opportunity to have input in the final resolution. What does that paradigm look like? I don't think that we should just sit around and wait and say, let's see what this country decides to do. Let's wait to see what the world powers decide to do. As you said, your discussion of the issue in the Middle East, in Africa, regarding desalinization plants, regarding how that things can be changed there. Rather than wait to see what the world powers can do, various groups, organizations, and coalitions now, we can make recommendations to these world powers. We can get our worldview, we can get our ideas in, and hopefully help to shape a paradigm that's that's forming, rather than wait for the world powers to. Because rest assured, look, those who were involved in some very evil deeds over the course of time have not gone anywhere, and they will be working to take an opportunity to shape the new paradigm. Right now, if you look at a UK, and if you look at a Keir Starmer, et cetera, and those people right now, they're stiffening their spines and they're saying, no, I'm not going to let this happen. We're going to keep it the old way. At some point, I believe even they will say, well, wait a minute. If you can't beat them, join them. And they're smart. We can't underestimate these people. And I think at some point they'll wake up and say, okay, you know what? The world's changing. How can we influence this new paradigm to take it back towards the direction it was? And so as they are doing that, I think we're all going to have to understand that this new the paradigm that is emerging is not definitive yet. And that we, from a positive perspective, can have input and help to shape it. And it is our responsibility to do it.
Well, the time is really flying, and we are almost on the hour. But let me mention one last idea. I believe since a very long time that the world has moved to a point where either we put the one humanity first and basically define the national interest in affinity and coherence with that interest of humanity as one, or it will not function. And that has to do with the fact that, when the Roman Empire collapsed, people in India didn't know about it for several years, and they had a beautiful Gupta period, and it was a rising Renaissance. And so, but this time, because of nuclear weapons, because of pandemics, because of the internet, we are so interconnected that I think we have reached a point in history where we need to have a new global security and development architecture, which takes into account the interest of every single country on the planet. And frankly, I think that the meeting between the foreign ministers Lavrov and Rubio, while you can say a lot about it as secondary and tertiary comments, has the germ of hope that such a new security order could emerge, because if the Trump administration says that they don't regard Russia as an enemy, well, that's already a very important step. If they would extend that to China, I think we would be even a huge step further. Trump has already proven in his first administration that he can talk to the leader of North Korea. I think that if they would take a more conciliatory attitude towards Iran, which now has a military alliance with Russia and is very close with China. I think the idea that you could come up with an order which does indeed do what the Peace of Westphalia did, which was to come up with the principle that you have to take into account the interest of every other if you want to have peace. And I think that, in my view, that would be the real new paradigm, because you're moving beyond geopolitics, you're moving into an area where diplomacy and negotiation will really be the way how conflicts will be settled in the future. So what's your view on such a perspective?
I agree, and I think right now that Russia can be an integral part of that, because Russia has the ability to mitigate the tension between India and China. And if they can also mitigate the tension between the US and China, then Russia can change the world. Because if China and India can get past their historical problems, and that the US can get around the concept of trying to dominate China or seeing them as an adversary as opposed to a potential ally, if Russia can get in that middle and get those, because those are the four, 3.5 world powers, right? I think we can really, that gives us an opportunity to move forward and to alleviate the proxy war issue, because a lot of these issues that we're looking at, or these wars that we're looking at, are proxy wars between world power. And that if you can get those four world powers really into alignment, all the proxy wars will dissipate, and they will all be invested. If there are wars in particular areas, they will all be invested in addressing them and bringing them to a halt.
Well, I just answered a question by TASS on my comments on the Riyadh meeting. The freak out about Europe was not invited. I said, why would you invite proxy powers, given the fact that the Ukraine war was a war between NATO and Russia? So I take your words with great joy, and I thank you very much. This is a extremely hopeful perspective, and I hope it will inspire a lot of people to come forward with new productive ideas. And thank you very much, and I hope to see you again soon.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your good work, and I certainly, it's been an honor and a pleasure to speak with you today.
Thank you. Till soon.